Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. This is our Pride edition of the Read Along. Jonathan Boorstein will be our guest. He's a writer, urban ecologist, and flaneur. We'll be asking about what that means shortly. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan, the Marshall Loeb Professor at the Stony Brook School of Journalism and co-founder of Digimentors. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and guest host of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. At about 9:45 a.m. Eastern Time, about an hour, 15 minutes from now, we'll be doing a special tribute to Richard J. Meislin. Tom Bodkin, the chief creative officer for the New York Times, will be joining us, as well as our own Carla Baranakis, who is the former deputy national copy chief for the New York Times. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We're also live on our website. Please like, please comment, please share. We are so glad that you've joined us today. And if you're watching on repeat, if you're watching a tape version, thank you for doing that as well. We often get twice the audience watching after the fact. We have a great show planned. As we mentioned earlier, Jonathan Boorstein will be with us. We'll be talking about Pride. We'll be talking about his writing. We'll, of course, cover the news of the day as well. Wanted to say good morning, early good morning to my mom watching from Seattle, Washington. Thank you, Mom. And we have Jonathan already putting in names of people that he wants to encourage to watch. So thank you, Jonathan. We're also live on Jonathan's Facebook and Twitter accounts. So thank you, Jonathan, for that. Doug Levy also joining us from the West Coast, this time from Hollywood instead of his usual San Francisco. And Diane Stefani is joining us from Margate, New Jersey. Thank you, Diane. Again, we do this show every Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, often with a special guest. So please make sure to join us. And in just a moment, I'm going to bring on Sri Srinivasan. Sri, good to see you. How are you doing today?
Good morning, and so excited for this episode. Jonathan's a dear friend who's been watching not just this show for all these years, for 5+ years, but he's also been a regular viewer of my COVID shows, every single episode, 279 of them. So I'm delighted to have him here featured as a guest. And we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Tell us. And please tag a friend. They can watch live or later. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on LinkedIn. Felix says hello from Germany. Welcome. And tell us how your Sunday is going. Liz is watching and says happy Pride from the Berkshires. Welcome. And Patricia is watching and says hello to the production team. So let's go give a tribute to the production team of Neil Parekh, who's our executive producer, along with the wonderful team that we have: Paula Kiger at Big Green Pen, Steve Taylor at Steve DeReeve, Julia Weeks at Julia L. Weeks, and Carla Baranakis at Kabara. You'll meet Carla later on around 9:45 when we do a tribute to the pioneering tech journalist Rich Meislin. So please watch for that, and please stay tuned for that. And Neil's at Neil Parekh, and we have such a great time putting the show together. And we do so much conversation around the news, but also the work and life of our special guest speaker. And we get to interact with all of you, this community that we've built around the last 5.5 years. We do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. And I thought I'd give you an early preview of what's coming up in the next few weeks. We're taking the American holiday of July 4th off. On July 11th, Marguerite Fox will be with us. She is a New York Times obits writer and author, and Neil will be guest hosting. And July 18th, Phil Bump will be here for a rare Washington Post read-along instead of the New York Times. And July 25th, Shashank Bengali will be joining us from London. He is a New York Times editor in London, and is also a former LA Times reporter in South Asia. So that's lots of great stuff coming up. Please tag and tell your friends to join us now. They can watch us live or watch us later. We have so many other folks watching as well. Thank you. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us how your Sunday is going. Ted Coltman's watching from Washington, D.C. on YouTube, and Ellen's watching on Facebook from New York City. And Ron Thomas is watching and says, made sure I tuned in today for my main man, Jonathan Boorstein, tuning in from Dubai. Ron has been a guest. He sat at my home in New York City last year before the pandemic. And Ron, thank you for all your friendship and support. Stefan is watching, another great friend and supporter, on my way to Pride Day in New York City. Going to be a fabulous read along with my man, Jonathan. So everyone watch for Stefan's photographs at Spin It Social. And Gunther is watching from Vienna, Austria. Welcome. Donato is watching from Eastchester, New York. Tag a friend, share with a friend. And Rachel's watching from New York City. Hi, Rachel. Thank you. Welcome. And from Asheville, North Carolina is Deborah's tuning in. So thank you for being here. And Chris Gorman's watching from New York City. Hi, Chris. Welcome. We are so glad to have all of you. We want to thank our sponsors who make this possible, our friends at Muckrack. Please check them out. If you're in communications and PR, you know them already. If you're a journalist, you should claim your free verified profile at Muckrack. And you can sponsor us too. If you know anyone who'd like to be a sponsor, have them reach out to us or send us their names and we'll talk to them. Sri@digimentors.group or Neil@digimentors.group. We also want to tell you about Digimentors, our company that's producing this show. It's an example of the talk shows we do for other people, and we'd love to do one for you. We also do social and digital consulting. We run conferences, virtual and hybrid, summits, webinars, training, workshops. We'd love to talk to you. Sri@digimentors.group and Neil@digimentors.group. We'd love to work with you. And I am very, very excited to just very quickly show you what's happening with the newspapers here. And this is, you can see here, the New York Times overview. And then we'll be talking to Jonathan. There's the magazine. There's a kids section. By the way, the magazine is a special climate issue of the magazine. So lots to talk about there. The book review. And there's a special edition called Main Street Block by Block, a special 8-fold, which we'll tell you about. They haven't done this in a year. And we have all the other sections as well. And the lead story you can see here is about that horrifying Florida disaster. And it says major concrete damage was cited in a 2018 report in that tower in Miami. And they were going to start working on repairs when everything fell apart. Todd, we want to tell you that Todd Bodkin, Chief Creative Officer of the New York Times, and Carla Baranakis will join us for a tribute to Rich Meislin at 9:45 a.m. Eastern. So we'd love to have you join us for that. But I think we're now ready to say hello to Jonathan. And Jonathan, thank you very much for being here and joining us. We'll put the card back up. Hi, Jonathan. We don't need the card. There's Jonathan. Jonathan's an amazing writer and someone who has watched New York and the world change from his East Village apartment where he's joining us. Good morning.
Good morning. Although I have just discovered that they are proposing a new historic district where I live, and the tentative title is South of Union Square. So I will, if they succeed in making this a historic district, I will no longer be in East Village. I will now be in a South of Union Square village.
So what will it be called? So us.
So what is a good choice? No, so far we don't have a cute name, but given how to put this, my tendency to come down with cases of the cutes, I can see South of Union Square being called Sus, and perhaps the slogan will be, do you sus?
All right, we have lots of people watching, Jonathan. I see Laura Silverman's watching from Philly. Good morning from sunny, sticky Philly, she says. Who else is here? Dave Gurman's watching from London. Welcome.
Miami, London.
Yeah, great to have all of you watching. Jonathan, to tell us about what is the importance of today, what's happening in New York, and what does this month, Pride Month, mean to you?
Working in order, the significance is, of course, the now famous Stonewall uprising, which essentially was the rebellion or response to police brutality and violence that set up our now LGBTQIA plus rights movement in 52 years and still going on, still dealing with police violence and antagonism. And somewhere along the line, I think some of the original purpose of the parade has been lost, but I'll get back to that point later. In terms of what it means to me or what I've seen, I actually arrive in the village more or less as the ramp up for the first parade is happening. The first in 1970, I'm basically wandering around NYU, and there's a huge follow-up demonstration to the Stonewall uprising in which a mass of people, mostly male, were in front of the one of NYU's dorms shouting "Ho, ho, homo," much as people in the anti-war movement were shouting "Ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh." And all the movements of that period were interrelated, and in some cases are still fighting the same battles. So for me, it's kind of sad. It's 50 years on, and some progress has been made, but a lot of progress hasn't been made that should have been.
Let's talk a little bit about some of that progress. You were with me when I interviewed Sasha Eisenberg this past week for his book called The Engagement, about the 25-year battle for same-sex marriage equality. We talked about this being one of the most important civil rights achievements of the last 50 years, that there was a time when you couldn't have expected this. It wasn't even possible. So talk about what this means and what are your thoughts on that battle?
Taking a step back, the idea of marriage being something other than what people think of as traditional, man, woman, actually is something that was discussed from the beginnings of the what we now call human rights movement, or initially gay rights movement. I think that a lot of the opposition to the concept kind of gave it a booster rocket and put it to the top of the agenda. I think that it's a wonderful thing. I hope that it holds. I am not quite as optimistic as the author of that book. There is a lot of opposition. A lot of it is direct. Some of it, more of it, is indirect, with the idea of religious exemptions. And I'm deeply concerned about the religious exemptions because that opens the door to other forms of accessing other forms of bigotry and prejudice against other groups.
Yeah, and that's we have always want to be vigilant about this. You have lived through all the changes that have taken place. There was a time when there were even, people who were accused of being or suspected, if someone made an accusation that someone was homosexual, they could lose their job, they could lose everything. And we now have someone like Pete Buttigieg, who is, not just ran a very prominent campaign for president, is now in the cabinet. So talk about that kind of political journey.
It's interesting seeing not just the overall arc, but the fact that in some areas it was sort of like it could be an open secret, but it couldn't be mentioned in public, particularly in the so-called glamour industries, film, television, fashion, and so on. I know everyone knew, but nobody talked about it. We're seeing two things. One is greater acceptance. There's more of a feeling, who cares? On the other hand, there is still a lot of resistance. I'm seeing most of the acceptance in the areas in which it was always kind of known. In the areas that are the most resistant to it were the areas where it was most closeted. But overall, it is healthier. It is a better environment.
All right. Folks, we're celebrating Pride Month with Jonathan, who is a writer, ecologist, and a flaneur. He's going to explain what that is in just a minute. Patricia says, thanks, Jonathan, for continuing to raise awareness on Pride. Please tell us where you're watching from. Please tag a friend. We're going to be discussing the New York Times. I have it laid out here. Rajan says, good morning from Center Reach, Long Island. And Miriam Berkeley's watching from Hell's Kitchen in New York City. Naomi's watching on the Upper West Side, fellow flaneur. So let's get right to it. What is a flaneur?
A flaneur, and among feminists, flaneurs, is basically a person who very much appreciates urban life, the cityscape, and things of that nature. Usually goes around the city on foot, looking for things that are typical of the city and urban interaction. There are certain types of flaneurs. There's the flaneur as writer, the original flaneurs. Baudelaire is traditionally is ground zero, though I would argue it's actually Edgar Allan Poe, but Walter Benjamin and so on were more essayists. So you've got little anecdotes or moments of city life. You then had the photographer's flaneur, at J, to a lesser extent, what are called street photographers, because street photographers are primarily journalists. They kind of are bridging some bits of being a flaneur, but they're also more into journalism. You have the sketch artist. There was an interesting minor piece in the Times about such a flaneur. He used to sit in the back of various coffee shops, mostly Starbucks, and just sketch the people who are wandering in and out. And it's part of the urban experience.
Here's Donato says, flaneur is a French noun referring to a person, literally meaning stroller, lounger, loafer, but with some nuanced additional meanings. And is the act of strolling with all its accompanying associations. I love walking, and I love walking through New York City, but it's not just the walking, it's the observations, right, that make you a flaneur as opposed to just...
look for, there's a degree of aggression in being a flaneur. Someone suggested the proper translation for flaneur is prowler, as in on the prowl. That is why boulevardier is not really a near synonym. Boulevardier is more laid back, more on a set path. The classic boulevardier in American culture is Maurice Chevalier. And he's not someone you can imagine looking for interesting things. He's more the person who sits there and lets interesting things happen around him.
Got it. And Ron says, Jonathan has to correct me, as I called his photos walkabouts, and he mentioned that flaneur was the same meaning. And Ron, by the way, does terrific walking about in Dubai.
I love his photographs.
Yeah, please check him out on the platform, because he's just so great with his pictures. And Laura says, could you argue that the New York Times Metropolitan Diary is a flaneuresque feature?
It is in parts. Mostly it's a series of anecdotes, but some of them are definitely flâneurie.
Okay. And as a flaneur photographer, I consider myself a conscientious observer.
That's a key point. Jay is probably to me is the flaneur photographer god.
And Alan is watching. Tell us about Alan.
In Florida. And I hope he's far away from falling buildings.
Yes. And Patricia says, love this word. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about your career, and then we will get to the New York Times.
Sometimes I feel my career is an example of flaneurie, since I've gone from one thing to the other. I've essentially been a writer since, the mid-late 1970s. I mostly write about either aspects of popular culture or alternately marketing, whether it's advertising, public relations, or direct response, now mostly e-commerce. The fun thing about the topics is that there are endless number of subtopics to write about, and some quite interesting, others not so interesting. But always writing. As of late, it's mostly been popular culture. The two places I write most for right now are the Writer's Digest, RIDER''FS, which is a internet magazine that was started as a print publication more than 20 years ago for dispatch riders, by dispatch riders, for dispatch riders. Dispatch riders are motorcycle messengers in Britain. And ivylive.com, which deals more with Ivy style, a type of preppy style, but as a lifestyle, not just as clothing. And I'm starting to write more and more about being a Flaneur, mostly in New York, but other places as well. I started a Facebook page, and I'm planning to start a proper blog as well to go along with it.
And you're very active on Instagram, Jonathan Boorstein, 1003, that's your zip code, right?
My zip code, yeah.
And we also want to just tell them that you said the Writer's Digest, and we have some images of some of your work and some photographs that we can talk through.
Okay.
So let's take a look, and we will show some pictures. We're talking to Jonathan Boorstein, who is a writer, an urban ecologist, and flaneur. And we have some photographs that we're going to show that will help us tell your story a little bit. And then we have the whole New York Times here to talk about. And folks, please stay tuned. At 9:45, we're going to pay tribute to the late Rich Meislin, who was a pioneering technology journalist who died very young at the age of 68 just this week. And Carla Baranakis will be in conversation about that. And so here are some things that we saw in the wonderful thread that was put together by Neil Parekh. So tell us what we're seeing on the screen.
This was an actual illustration for an article I wrote for Stonewall 50, Longing and Belonging, and it dealt with what is roughly the history of gay and lesbian motorcycle clubs in the United States. The Satyrs are claim to be the oldest continuous such club. It would certainly be difficult to disprove that. They are based in Los Angeles. Here locally in New York, the Empire City Motorcycle Club is also been around since the 1950s.
Great. These are people who were in motorcycle clubs as they have evolved also, right? The clubs have also
well, yes,
changed.
basically they sort of start off pretty much the same way all motorcycle clubs began. It was a bunch of friends who just wanted to ride together because they were made up of gay membership. They had, shall we say, an ambiguous, if not antagonistic, relationship with the American Motorcycle Association, usefully called the AMA, and ultimately dropped out, which is why we don't have accurate histories. As close as we have of a archive of that is actually in the leather archives in Chicago. And they just shoeboxes and shoeboxes full of the records of all these now defunct clubs, not very well organized because they just don't have, the time and the money to get them into proper order. But it's there ready for some scholar to spend a year pouring through it.
Let's just talk about this article that Neil is showing us with fascinating history of motorcycle clubs, but also the way in which they have changed. We saw a picture there of Senator Joseph McCarthy and the Red Scare, and they tied homosexuality to communism, and that added to the dangers that gay folks had to live through.
Basically, by equating homosexuality with communism, he and his fellow activists, for lack of a better term, created an atmosphere which was increasingly hostile to lesbian and gay people. because now not only they were sexually suspect, but they were now also politically suspect. So you could lose a government job for just being, gay, and this also became an issue in industry as well.
And so that's part of what people were living through. Tell us about this picture with Marlon Brando in it.
Oh, that's the wild one. That really stems off of an incident involving the straight motorcycling world, Hollister, in 1947, which was a much hyped. Well, basically, it was a riot, but essentially a lot of people having too much alcohol and not behaving very well, which was picked up by Life magazine, among others. The claims are that it was blown out of proportion. To a certain degree, that is true. Ultimately inspires not just The Wild One, but a whole bunch of really wonderfully bad movies called exploitation films. The classic motorcycle gang terrorizes something or another. What happens is that the character that Brando portrays becomes something of a gay icon or gay cliche, which is ultimately picked up in the Village People in their biker model. Although my favorite version of it is actually Eric Von Zipper from the old Beach Party pictures, which is a pitch perfect imitation.
And tell us about, and so you write in this article about the gentleman who plays the motorcycle rider.
Yeah, he was a motorcycle. He was actually a motorcyclist who was impersonating a gay person impersonating a motorcyclist. It's kind of an interesting nested set of drag identities, if you will. But he was a real motorcyclist, and he'd like to, kept his motorcycle in his living room, and ultimately, sadly, dies. And his last request was to be buried in his Village People costume.
And in the article, you also talk a little bit about AIDS and its impact on the motorcycle community. Can you talk about that?
Basically, AIDS affected all of the lesbian gay subcultures. Obviously less so to lesbian, but it created an interruption in continuity in it. It was, in some cases, I think people are so focused on the glamorous industries, film, fashion, and so on, they forget that there's some of the other areas of the subcultures were also impacted. In this particular case, it's what helped end a lot of the clubs, but also a lot of these clubs just basically never went looking for new members. They never did proper membership drives, so they wound up. It's kind of like a double-barreled effect, which is kind of sad. It would have been nice if more of them lasted, more of them continued.
And what is the state today of motorcycle clubs and that culture?
Well, I suppose the big news is the AMA finally acknowledges the fact that there are such clubs, and will, in fact, and if I remember the last time I looked, which was good 3 years ago, they had a small but incomplete list. The clubs themselves that have survived are still going strong. I get regular mailings from both the Satyrs and Empire City on what they're up to. Their membership requirements have loosened up a bit, but it's still predominantly, older people. Younger ones don't seem to gravitate as much toward these clubs. So, good they survived. I hope they continue to do so.
Before we go to read the New York Times, I want to ask you how a person who is a flaneur and so interested in walking around became interested in motorcycles.
They're sort of unrelated. As a little boy, I was just fascinated by all sorts of motor vehicles and transportation, ranging from hot air balloons and zeppelins to motorcycles and old cars with hand cranks and running boards. There was a wonderful old car museum up outside Boston called the Lars Anderson Museum that I just adored visiting, because they just had a great selection of cars from about the 1880s, 1890s to about the 1920s, maybe a little earlier. And that was just my favorite museum to go to for that reason. I regard myself in terms of writing as I deal with popular culture. So it's sort of like it's motorcycles and popular culture. It's men's fashion and popular culture. In terms of being a flaneur, there's a quote from Steve McQueen, who is also a motorcyclist as well as an actor. I'm not going to bungle the quote, and I apologize, but basically he was asked, what does he do in his motorcycle? And he says, well, you sort of ride around, and if you see something that looks interesting, you ride over and look at it, which, is flânerie on two wheels. So there is kind of a relationship in that way, but from the practical point of view, most of the actual exploration is on foot and it is urban. And trying to ride a motorcycle in New York City is an adventure, but not necessarily always a positive one.
Yeah, well, we are talking right now to Jonathan Boorstein, who is, by the way, I want to correct the pronunciation because I've been getting it wrong. Jonathan, you didn't correct me forcefully enough, so I didn't take. So it's Jonathan Boorstein. I said it wrong on 280 episodes, and I blame myself and I blame you. But Jonathan is Jonathan's a writer and urban ecologist in Flaneur who is with us. We are now going to talk about the New York Times and talk about what's happening in the news. And we're going to continue to take your questions for Jonathan. And then at 9:45 a.m. Eastern Time, we're going to pay tribute to the late Rich Meislin, who died this week at the age of 68. He was a pioneering Times editor and web journalism expert. And we'll be joined by Tom Bodkin, who's the chief creative officer of the New York Times, and our own Carla Baranakis, former deputy national copy chief of the Times, will interview him. And you are watching a special episode of the Pride for Pride Month of the New York Times read along. So welcome everybody, and let's take a look at the paper and see what's happening here. And of course, Jonathan, please jump in at any point if you have something you'd like to add.
I'll be glad to jump in. I'm going to run right past the main section and go to the kids section, which I know you like to highlight, because there at the bottom is a very interesting little headline which says trans kids. That would not even have been on anyone's radar 50 years ago. And here we are. It's not just trans kids, but trans kids fight back. And the fact that we're now looking at questions of sexual identity and gender fluidity. Really, if I remember the target age range of this section, for children who are essentially before puberty. So this is that's a very interesting development to me. And concurrent to this is we're having the first Kids Pride event on the Hudson River, Pier 45, if memory serves, that in conjunction with the Brooklyn Children's Museum, again, drawing out the idea of family and children and these questions.
And thank you for highlighting that. I just do want to say that now the idea of trans athletes at various age groups is being used as another part of the culture wars.
It's an interesting one, and it is at the moment. I think at the moment it's kind of. It's like on the thing, where do people stand? Because how do you deal with certain issues of muscle strength and so on? It's going to be that one I predict is going to get worse and nastier. I don't like predicting the future, but that one I will actually go and say that's going to get worse and nastier.
Let's go back to the front page. You can see that the Florida story is very much the lead piece here, and a photograph that reminds me of 9/11 and all those missing posters downtown as people were looking for their family members in 9/11. And I know you're very familiar with that. We were hoping that because there's an international building and lots of folks who travel a lot live there, that they were just unaccounted for. But now they have raised the number to 156 missing people. And one of the questions was, should people who are in the sister building next door, should they leave?
Yes.
I would definitely be heading for the exits.
Yeah,
Paula said
that presupposes they have somewhere to go.
Right. Paula says, such a great sign that trans kids are part of that kids section. I totally agree on that. Okay, online trickery in fundraising entraps seniors. Analysis shows older donors are milked by campaigns. And that's one of the things that we all worry about. And by the way, when you think of this, we think of this as affecting very old people. But I can tell you, our kids are always warning us to be careful, Rupa and I, about what we do online so that we don't get scammed. And Biden's efforts at race equity run into snags. This is his direct emphasis on diversity, equality, inclusion, is running into problems. Teens' new way to define parents, getting vaccine. So we know that there are parents who don't want their kids to get vaccine, but kids are going out and getting it themselves. I presume that that's some of it is legal and some of it is maybe a little bit hazy, but I look forward to reading that story. Rise of Adams spurs his party to look inward. And what is your analysis of the New York mayoral race? As you know, we have an international audience that won't be familiar with the names, but what do you think the election, which will not be decided for several weeks, what does it mean for New York?
It's I'm afraid it probably means more of the same, unfortunately. I don't understand ranked voting. I am an independent. I don't officially, I don't support either party. The joke there is I cannot remember a time I did not actually vote for a Democratic candidate. It seems to be I'm making a point not worth making there. I was totally unimpressed with the total field of candidates. My nasty joke, it puts the rank into ranked voting. The seeming three front runners, any one of whom could actually turn into the candidate, I cannot build much enthusiasm over. I'm just really pessimistic. And as I said, I'm expecting more of same, and a lot of the same is not good.
Thank you, Jonathan. Here we're looking at Gloria Vasquez in Soacha, Colombia, with her daughter who's 8, who left school in the pandemic. There's a Latin American dropout crisis. And I think we're seeing that in lots of places, and the way all of this has been handled has been a real issue. By the way, here's a huge Tiffany & Co. ad on the bottom, and it's for Pride Month and always celebrating the LGBTQIA plus community. Stand for love. Tiffany, very traditional retailer. Again, this is something you wouldn't have seen 25 years ago, and it's great to...
of that sort of corporate sponsorship has become a very controversial issue in the gay community in general, and in Pride events in particular. A number of sponsors have been highlighted as not being true allies, because not only are they touting rainbow flags and donating to Pride events, but they're also supporting very known anti-LGBT QIA plus candidates, so Mitch McConnell being the biggest name. If I can give you a quick list, I'm going to have to read from notes because I have a terrible memory. But the big five that everyone annoys everyone is Anheuser-Busch beer, of course, NBC, GM, AT&T, and Coca-Cola, which I'll get back to in a moment. T-Mobile has been also highlighted. Robert Reich, someone I would probably make a great guest on your program, also very much is after Wells Fargo's support for Mitch McConnell. Walmart, of course, and these are not small names; these are big names. I should add, by the way, in defense of Pride events, the typical supporter or sponsor is kind of it's places like God's Love We Deliver, Sage, which is for the senior queer community, and things like that. They're not quite that controversial. Coke is particularly interesting because it is based in Atlanta and is therefore also under a lot of pressure because of voter repression there. And it has a history of being involved with a number of racist and fascist organizations. Going back to its origin, it was founded by a member of the Ku Klux Klan who was involved in the Leo Frank lynching. It also owns Fanta, which was originally a company that was established to rival Coke, but for the Reich. It has a complicated history there. I'm surprised no one has really, gone into it in detail and, with a fine scalpel.
One of the things that you're talking about, this kind of sponsorship issue and gay pride banners and things by companies. We've also seen with Black issues that Black folks are saying, you're doing great with these banners, but you are at the same time not doing enough actual diversity and actual inclusion. So we see a parallel there.
With Latinx and to a lesser extent, Native American, lesser extent because most of you don't remember that that's also an issue, sadly. It's quite common. What the companies want is to be in good graces for all these niche markets, basically to flog cheap goods. How much kitsch can one buy? But when it comes to actual being an ally in political support, a number of them waver. And this is the point. And I think in the case of the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the movements we see around now are very much aligned with it and support it, such as the Queer Liberation March this year is openly supporting Black Lives Matter. It's part of their banner and their purpose, is saying, oh, June 19th is fine, but how about letting us vote?
Right. That's certainly one of the ways to look at this.
Rainbow flags are fun, but how about a place on the board of directors?
Right.
It's an ongoing issue, and it's really it's different verse but the same verse.
I hear you. Here's the international section, and one of the things we've mentioned in past episodes is that just a couple of weeks ago, the New York Times ended its tracking the outbreak sections. And now those stories, the virus stories, are in their respective places. So international will have international, et cetera. And that tells you how the pandemic is changing in the US, but not worldwide. And by the way, just to point out that the WHO still suggests masking for people who are vaccinated because of the variants. And one of our neighbors was telling us that who's a doctor was telling us there are hundreds of variants just in New York State, and so everyone still needs to be careful. We're seeing that New Zealand, Australia, and Bangladesh are re-locking down because of the variant. So everyone, please be careful. Military job offers. Sorry, go ahead.
Is that a lot of the places here in New York, you will find that the management companies say, "Oh, tenants can be unmasked, but staff has to remain masked." And that is, to me, an absolutely shocking socioeconomic distinction.
I hear you. Military job offers Muslims a rarity in France, acceptance. And we have seen, by the way, speaking of the military and Pride Month, can you just reflect on going from, outright bans of folks who are gay in the military to don't ask, don't tell, to the current policy?
Well, first of all, if you were found to be gay and you were in the military, you got a dishonorable discharge. You weren't banned from joining it as much as you were in a rather difficult situation once you were a member. And people tend to forget that conscription was pretty much universal for all males up to the 1970s. Don't ask, don't tell is basically a bowing down to anti-lesbian and gay prejudice. Should not have been passed in the first place, a real blot on the Clinton administration. We've now gone to pretty much a full acceptance, almost to the point of who cares. Senior military objections to things like that, where they're sort of annoyed at being even asked the questions I find interesting. I think what I'm most worried about in that case is that we are hearing more and more about pockets in the military which are extremely reactionary and almost like running a military within the military. And that concerns me. If I were a reporter covering those issues, that's what I would focus on, find out what I would want to know more about.
And we are definitely going to be paying attention to those issues. I remember watching MASH as a child, and the character, Jamie Farr's character of Corporal Klinger, wearing dresses and things, trying to get a Section 8 discharge, which was among the things you could get a Section 8 discharge was for cross-dressing and for being gay and all of that. So that was a punchline at that time. And now we're going towards where the Army, the military, the issues are around paying for gender reassignment surgery. And that's progress.
It is progress. I will point out that that particular MASH character seems to be lifted a bit from Catch-22, where the idea is that anyone who was sane enough to want to get out of military service wasn't insane enough to be actually discharged.
We have some more comments coming in, folks. We're talking to Jonathan Boorstein as we read the New York Times. And we thank everyone from watching from around the world. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your comments. Thank you for tagging and sharing this with your friends. They can watch live or later. Patty's watching and says, love this topic on human rights for all, clearly written and spoken. No excuses, Patty says. So thank you. And Edward is watching. Good morning, Edward. Thank you for being with us. Love the painting behind you. And we're just so grateful to everybody for being part of this journey here. Sujana says, just found out the USAA, which is a big insurance company, supports Tucker Carlson with ads. Awful. And the whole support of Fox News and the white supremacist and other problematic aspects of Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity are something that needs to be closely examined. And we are certainly seeing boycotts and things like that happening. Okay, let's go get to the paper. An important story, discovery of graves bolsters Indigenous push for reckoning in Canada. This is just an absolutely horrifying story of these unmarked graves.
Interesting to me because these revelations have been going on for a couple of decades now in Canada itself, but this is the first time I remember seeing it in a newspaper in the United States. I could be wrong there. Someone please fact check me. But they've been, those revelations have been increasing, and it's most of what I've read has been in the Globe and Mail about it, and I suspect they've only scratched the surface of what's really going on.
And of course, we have our own history in America of awful treatment of Native Americans in so many different ways.
It is not an exaggeration to call it a genocide.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Let's see. Europe's divisions over Hungary and Russia emerge at summit. Where gladiators once paced, so too can tourists. Rome has opened the Colosseum's warren of tunnels to the public, part of a huge restoration project. And the UK Health Minister, Matt Hancock, has resigned in a distancing scandal. He and his he's married, and his married colleague were caught in a kissing video in his own office. They had a security camera in his office. That was the video that was used. So he wasn't very smart. He must have known there was a surveillance camera in there. Here's an unusual ad for Vice News and correspondent Alzo Slade about Power in Truth. Vice News, a full ad for that. And 2 years after Sudan's revolt, tensions rise over a morgue full of bodies. And royal drama in court, but without the prince. This is in Jordan. And let's see here. So much to look at. He saved 31 people at sea, and then he got a 142-year prison sentence. Wow. Migrants reaching the Greek island of Lesbos last year. A smuggling crackdown has led to a long prison terms for many seeking asylum. That's That's a crazy story and very sad. On the national front page is Beyond the Politics of Communion, an Ancient Holy Ritual. And as clerics debate who deserves to take the Eucharist, some of the faithful think only of salvation. And this is about Joe Biden, who is the most Catholic, the second Catholic to be in office, but the most observant, among the most observant presidents we've ever had. He's going to be denied communion because of his political stance on abortion, even though he himself has said he opposes it, he supports it politically. And Brooklyn councilman unites progressive for 9-point lead in controller's race. Judge's order left her homeless, but new ruling will help. There's so much going on in New York. Online trickery of political fundraising and trapped seniors. We remember how the Donald Trump campaign got people to give a, say, $50 donation, but they didn't realize that the pay every month or weekly even repeat donation box was automatically checked. And so people lost millions of dollars collectively. The Dark History of Forced Sterilization. This is about Britney Spears. And she was forced to, by her family, be on birth control. One of the things that people have observed, if a rich, powerful white woman with immense popularity like Britney Spears can get caught up in all of these problems, what does it mean for other women with less power?
The journalist part says, I want an independent audit of the books.
Yeah, I think that would really help. How Biden's comments upended a political win. There's all kinds of interesting aspects of that people are talking about. And this is a full page ad. The New York Times is proud to honor colleagues who have served in the Times for 50 years and made us what we are today. So Richard Selensky was in the mailroom, and Robert McFadden reported for 60 years with the New York Times. 60 years with the New York Times. And these are other people, a delivery driver, Charles Glassman, Robert Brown, who's a assistant general foreman, an assistant foreman here, Vincent, and Daryl, advertising layout coordinator, 52 years with the Times. Let's keep going here. Johnson & Johnson to pay $230 million as part of the exit from the opioid industry. My wife Rupa had surgery recently, and she observed that when she had surgery 4 years ago, they sent her home with opioids, but not this time. And New York City is preparing a plea to lure back tourists. They're going to do a $30 million ad campaign, the Visitors Bureau, to get people to come to New York. International people can't easily.
Feeling toward tourists.
Sorry, can you say that again?
I have a very ambiguous feeling toward tourists.
You do. Tell us about that.
I live in one of the main tourist attractions in New York City, and there are certain times of year where I can't go out and enjoy my own neighborhood because I'm tripping over tourists.
And so it's been quieter this past year.
Yeah, but not in a good way.
Yeah, of course. Let's talk a little bit about obits. As you know, I'm a fan of obits. What are your attitude towards them?
I'm going to have to confess, typical, journalist, news junkie, obits are great. There's invariably, at least once a week, someone I think, why haven't I heard of this person before when they were still alive? Sometimes interesting, almost brilliant analysis of what made a person important. Conclusive in a way that a larger biography might have lost track of. And sometimes just interesting, odd people. Going back, a great many years, I remember there was like a 3 or 4 paragraph obit, which really dates this story. It was before the obits became, because the internet became tighter. But it was about a British army officer whose claim to fame is that he won Britain's cheapest war with 6 soldiers and an airplane didn't quite fly. Don't remember the man's name, remember what made him famous. And to me, that was like the ultimate reason to read an obit, to find out about people like that.
Thank you. Here we see a former guest on the New York Times read-along, Neil Genslinger's obit of Stephen Dunn, who's a poet who celebrated life's ordinary passages. And we recommend an app called Miss You Graham if you want to pay tribute to someone who has passed. So check out Miss You Graham on Android and on the iPhone. Tell me about your relationship with sports.
In terms of team sports, as distant as I can make it, I just have never gotten into them. I've always pursued one sport or another on my own. Rowing, which I recently published a piece about, but my younger self also fenced, did some martial arts. I ran, played squash. Basically, more with enthusiasm than any degree of true excellence. But I enjoyed it, and it, I think my ultimate message in that, you've got to keep moving if you want to keep moving, and sports is a great way to do it. Watching sports doesn't do much for me.
I hear you. We want to welcome all our friends who've joined us because of Jim Roberts's retweet of the video. Jim was a former guest on this show, and so we are very grateful to him, and everyone who's been sharing this. Please tag a friend. We've got about 15 minutes or so more with Jonathan, and then we're going to do a special tribute to Rich Meislin, a pioneering journalist who died this week at just the young age of 68. Tom Bodkin, who's the chief creative officer of the New York Times, and Carla Baranakis, former deputy national copy chief, will be talking about Rich and his passing. One of the stunning lines in the article is that when Rich left Mexico City as bureau chief, there was a feeling that it was because he was gay. It was known that he was gay, that he had been asked to leave. And that's at the New York Times in 1986. The editors denied that accusation, but just the fact that that could even be something that people had to live through as recently as 1986 tells you how much has changed. And we'll be talking about that in just a little bit. Let's look at the rest of the paper. And this is an unusual eightfold in the New York Times. As you can see here, this is a way of looking at a horizontal story. And this is about the downtown in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And we spent 4 months photographing several blocks along the south end of Main Street to capture the pandemic's impact in the downtown of this smallish town in Pennsylvania. So what do you think of this kind of layout? And I know, Jonathan, you're a great observer and writer about architecture. And tell us, what do you see here?
I like the long shapes of the streets, but because I have a background in architectural history, sort of like you're kind of losing some of the interesting buildings that may be in along the way in favor of the panorama. I actually remember being in Wilkes-Barre briefly sometime back in the early mid 1970s. But this was still interesting to me for that way. Also, this is in a way an example of being a photographer photographing a cityscape without being a flaneur because of the flattened perspective. And
this section was designed by Molly Bedford of the New York Times. And we want to give shout outs to the designers on special pages like this. And this is what really makes, for those of us who still subscribe to the paper, a reason to subscribe are these special sections that they put together. Those are really nice. Of course, there's a kids section as well. We mentioned that, and we had pointed out, Jonathan did, that there's a trans kids fight back on the cover of the New York Times kids section. Let's look at some of the other sections. Meetings, why? Does every conversation need to be a gathering? Does anything? Maybe something isn't actually missing when we are remote. What are your thoughts on meetings?
I remember too many editorial meetings where I sat there wondering, why am I here?
But that was the culture, right? So you were.
That was the culture. That was just text me, and it's faster.
Chitachi's watching, former guest, says, good morning from Fort Lauderdale. Great to have you, Chitachi. Thank you. And we're hoping everyone stays safe down in Florida. After death, the big chill, the business of cryopreservation got a lot more complicated during the pandemic. These are for people who freeze their bodies for the time when science will catch up and let them be unfrozen. Thoughts on that?
I have a very cold feeling about it, but on a less flip note, there's something unseemly about what is essentially a meaningless grasp for immortality. If that's not too heavy a way of phrasing it this early in the morning. There are more dignified requests to do with your body. The likelihood of science being able to do that in the first place and being able to revive the bodies in the second is, kind of science fictional, and it has what would be cute and say an ick factor. I don't like it.
By the way, just so people understand the pricing, it's $200,000 at this company to handle a whole body, and $80,000 for a neuropreservation. I presume that means brains. And the company is storing 182 bodies or neuros of people from ages 2 to 101, and but had to cancel public tours amid the COVID outbreak.
Public tours? Oh
my God.
My other feeling is totally silly and on the flip side of it, but all I can think of is Roger Corman of AIP Films and Snarknado series, reading this and coming up with yet another, B picture for television.
And Chitachi says, big ick factor. And look at this. Rahajan says, cryopreservation was a theme in science fiction for years. I seem to recall a Larry Niven novel around 1970 referring to the bodies as corpuscles.
I don't remember that novel, but I love that word.
And my mom's watching from Kerala, India. Hi, Amma. Love you. Thank you so much for watching. I am so sorry that we haven't met in so long, but looking forward to seeing you when things improve in India, and praying for everybody in India and hoping everybody can get the vaccine. Americans need to do more to get vaccines into places where they're needed, including Latin America, Asia, Africa, and of course, India as well. We're looking at a Pride Month story. Their fight is on. The lesbian Avengers are refusing to be commodified, at least not by the Gap. And this is this very striking T-shirt called The Lesbian Avengers, and about what's happening there. And this Gap T-shirt, which ignited an intense discussion over ownership. So I don't know if you'd come across that.
Indirectly, what we're seeing with a lot of the Pride marches is a degree of fragmentation as people become increasingly disenchanted with what they see as the commodification of the subculture. So you now have a series of parades. On Friday there was the drag parade. On Saturday there's the Dyke March. Today we have the Queer Liberation March, but we also have Kids Pride, which is a new contribution to it. But there was a rumor as of very early this morning that the actual Heritage of Pride, which was supposed to be just a virtual event, may have an actual march starting around noon and 26th and 5th. I was not able to confirm that.
And here is an ad for Pride 2021 from Nordstrom. And here is a Bergdorf Goodman ad, famous store in New York. Dear New York, seeing you anew, you simply shine. The artful spiral of the Guggenheim, the starry ceiling of Grand Central Terminal, the spectacular fashion from the runways to the Rockaways, the openings, the after parties, the clatter of heels on cobblestones, the captivating view from our gleaming Fifth Avenue windows. Have you you have been our home for 122 years, and we still find magic at every turn. It's a love letter to New York City.
Trying to do something different.
Tell us about the card we're seeing on the screen here. This is what you were referring to.
Yeah, the Queer Liberation March is today. This is a group that essentially left Heritage of Pride, objecting to, well, to be blunt, both the commodification as well as the inclusion of the police in the event. You must remember that essentially Stonewall happens because of police brutality and violence, and it was felt for many years in the parade that it was inappropriate for the police to participate. The Gay Policemen's Group, GAOL, essentially had to sue for participation in 1996. Its participation has remained controversial with the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and other elements has really brought this into the fore, much more than it had been for a while, although it had been a hot topic. And 3 years ago, basically, the Reclaim Pride Coalition, which runs the Queer Liberation March, decided they'd had enough with it, and their motto is, no corporate sponsorship, no police, no permit. They just march. They have had problems with the police in the past, where the police have jostled them, thrown them to the ground, hit them with pepper spray. And I'm hoping that this year will be somewhat more peaceful. As for Heritage of Pride, it has been sending out contradictory signals on police participation. The last I heard, gay police officers or lesbian police officers could participate if they were not in uniform and unarmed. As for the usual police guarding the route, they were looking into private security forces. The problem there is most private security forces are staffed by former or off-duty police officers. It's a different issue.
Thank you, Jonathan. In a few minutes, we'll be ending our conversation, sadly, with Jonathan, and moving on to a conversation to pay tribute to Rich Meislin, who passed away this week, a pioneering journalist at the New York Times. But one of my signs that New York City has changed is going to a business lunch or a daytime lunch, a meeting outside of our home, and I got to do that with Jonathan, who is a wonderful meal companion. He's got so many great stories, as you can all hear. So I hope you will all contact him and get on his dance card so that you can have a great lunch or dinner with Jonathan. And we went to a great restaurant where everybody knew him, and it was near his home in the East Village. But I did want to show one question from the social cues column, which is about a restaurant, but in a different way. So Jonathan, I'm going to read this to you. There are no right or wrong answers, as you know. This is Philip Galanz's column. And the question is, friends of mine were vacationing in a small town and waiting for a local restaurant to open. It had rained and the street was dotted with puddles. Their teenage daughter stuck her toe in one and found a diamond ring with a good-sized stone. Her parents let her keep it. Would you consider this a finders keepers situation?
I assume they had the ring appraised to make certain it was a diamond. That's my first question. Is it really a diamond? How New York? Oh dear. That's for me. The answer is yes, because how are you going to identify who owns the ring? The other alternative would be to leave it off in a police station and let it become part of their a lost and found.
And yeah, so people should check out the social cue column and get the answer. But again, there's no right or wrong answer. And our common law recognizes a finders keepers doctrine, is what Philip says. As we start to wind up here, I just want to look at the WOWs column. Last week's guest on the New York Times Read Along was Kate Doty, who's a writer here. And that's one of the things that has changed, is that we see same-sex couples here. And this is a profile of a Hindu priest who officiates at LGBTQ weddings, Shushma Dwivedi. here in New York. And so, again, this is how things have changed over time. One of our previous guests, Linda Amster, who was part of our celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Pentagon Papers, told us that as a researcher, she would sometimes be asked to find a lesbian for a quote. That's how unusual it was to have lesbians quoted in the New York Times, that you'd ask a researcher to find one, so to speak. And those are all changes that we have seen in our lifetime. And of course, you have too, Jonathan. Sunday Review
I'd like to
cover.
go to the book review.
I'm sorry?
I'd like to go to the book review.
So we'll quickly look at the book review here. And the cover is The Plague Year, America in the Time of COVID by Lawrence Wright, who's writing about 9/11 and so much more, is absolutely worth reading. So please do check out the book. And your thoughts about the book review?
It has one of my favorite sections, which you're looking at right now, where they interview a writer. Usually the writer has a book coming out, so it's PR for the writer. And the interview is interesting in itself, but I always find a book in that interview that I simply must have. In the case of Diane Johnson, she refers to a book called The Possessed, about people who read Russian novels. And to me, that alone sounds hysterically funny. It turns out she listed as a book that made her laugh.
All right. So we're just looking at the Times book review here. Morningside Heights is a novel set in uptown Manhattan. And there's a Hungarian pastry shop, which I used to live in that neighborhood for a long time. Rajan says, when my life is more settled, I'm going to reach out to Jonathan to grab a cuppa or snack. I'm glad to have made his acquaintance via this platform.
I am as well, and it's going to include beef rendang.
Yes, it must. And there's a new essays collection by Salman Rushdie, Languages of Truth, Essays 2003 to 2020, From Fatwa to Fabulism. Salman Rushdie takes stock of the 21st century so far.
I remember smuggling one of his books into France, where it was temporarily banned.
And you spend a lot of time in France, so tell us about that.
I don't know if I spent all that much time there, but no, this is my old college chum, lives there with his wife. And when Rushdie's book was banned, I happened to have been planning a trip. So I quickly bought a copy, hid it in my luggage. This was back before they went through your luggage that carefully and smuggled the book in. But it's a place that I very much love. I think that I could visit Paris once a year easily for the rest of my life and be absolutely delighted.
We should point out that you had co-written a book called A Solo Diner, and
Tables for One New York. And it was about dining alone here in New York. Rather weirdly, it was co-authored with Michael Kaminer, and it was supposed to be part of a series where we'd go through all the major cities in the country. I always felt that we should have a cover photo in which the two of us were together, but each of us on our own table for one. But alas, that was not to be. The book was published in 2001. It actually got a favorable notice in the Times and went nowhere because a week or so later, 9/11 happened, and as with many books published in that period, just went under everyone's radar for more important reasons.
Thank you. And we'll just want to mention here, the Times Magazine is about climate change. The only solution, try everything. And I think I was hoping that the pandemic would teach us the importance of fighting climate change, but I'm not optimistic. But this climate issue is worth reading, so everyone should check this out online or in your paper when you get a chance. And
discussing about the change over 50 years, I'm sorry to jump in. 50 years ago, we were discussing climate change and ecology. But then one of the really interesting ideas was to start space colonies based on Lagrangian points, where you'd have these huge, 50, 60 mile size, essentially tin cans, and people would live on the inside of them and float in space. And the reason why people would go to cities in space was because we'd already ruined Earth beyond the saving point.
And that, of course, is one of the ideas of the work that folks like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and others are working on as well. Jonathan, we want to just give you a final chance to say some thing to our audience, and then we'll say goodbye to you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for letting me actually participate in this program. I enjoyed it. It was definitely different for me, and I really, I'm hoping to, improve my on-screen presence as I get more involved with my Flaneur project. The Times is always a wonderful paper to read. Two things about the old-fashioned print media, which I still love, is that it's great. You can actually do a bit of flâneurie as you go through a paper, spotting this article and that, which you can't do in the more organized website or on the mobile versions. And that, to me, is the great joy of it. And I'd also like to put in that don't just read the Times, read papers from other parts of the world. I read the Guardian UK, I read the Globe and Mail, I hit a few others as I came along. Read.
Wonderful note to end our conversation with Jonathan Boorstein on read. Everyone, please read. And Jonathan, we'll say goodbye to you as we transition to our tribute to Richard Meislin, a pioneering web journalist at the New York Times who died just this week at the age of 68. And we are honored to be able to do this tribute to Rich. And we're going to be joined by Tom Bodkin, Chief Creative Officer of the New York Times, and Carla Baranakis, former Deputy National Copy Chief of the Times, who is going to come on now and talk about Rich. And there's Tom as well. Thank you both for being here. And I'm sorry, Tom, we're meeting under these circumstances, but I'm glad that we're able to pay tribute at this moment.
Thank you, Sri.
Carla, over to you.
Thank you, Sri. So thank you, Tom, for joining us. And first, before we get started, I just wanted to ask you how you've been managing over the last year and a half with the pandemic.
Oh, thank you so much. I've been fine. I'm very lucky to be in a situation where coping with the pandemic is easier. As you can see, I'm in the country right now. I have a house in the Catskills, so I've been luckier than many others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And then first, before we get into Rich, your title is Chief Creative Officer at the New York Times, and I think you have a couple of other titles too. But could you just explain what it is that you do?
Sure. Really, my sort of more meaningful title is Design Director, and I've been Design Director of the Times since, I guess, 1987, well before the digital era. And in that role, I oversee all of the design of both the newspaper and our digital products. It's primarily about the visual presentation of the news throughout our products.
And throughout the years, you've worked very closely with Rich Meislin on a number of things. Not every New York Times employee gets an obituary in the paper. So what is it about Rich and his work that elevated him to someone who deserved an obituary?
He was really an extraordinary journalist in the sense that his breadth of skill and interests were really ranged far and wide. I've been working in journalism for 40 years. I know journalists well, and I know New York Times journalists very well. And usually they're very kind of very focused on one thing, and that is certainly historically traditional journalism, writing, editing, reporting. And Rich was actually an excellent traditional journalist. He was a reporter, a writer, and an editor, and was excellent at that. But he also had from days well before we became enlightened. He was interested very much in technology, and from a young age was interested in technology, and then used that to push the New York Times, which is not surprisingly a very traditional organization, really help them move into the digital era, which is quite different from traditional journalism. He was truly a pioneer.
Tom, both you and Rich come from a very innovative point of view. You have, taken the Times, both print and online, through many improvements and design changes. You were there for bringing color photographs into the paper, which at the time was shocking. People were upset and worried that color would somehow change the New York Times for the worse. So how did you, and Rich, bringing along a lot of the digital things, but he also innovated, I believe, on the graphics desk as well and some other places. And so
that's when I first met Rich, because as the design director, graphics was very fledgling then. This is 1987, and it was actually sort of not even really a formal department, and it became part of the art department, and I was one of Rich's many bosses, and he was the first graphics editor really at the New York Times, the first formal graphics editor at the New York Times. So he was very involved in the visualization of data, and as was I. Overseeing that department, but certainly not to the depth of Rich. But I think Rich was also always interested in design and graphic design specifically. And I think we both shared a lot of interests that went beyond traditional journalism. He was just very open-minded and curious. And he understood at a very early stage the importance of digital media in a way that the rest of the newsroom really didn't. As I said, it's a very traditional organization. Sort of the digital media in its early days, 1990s, was sort of met with either indifference, ignorance, or skepticism. And then as it evolved, there was a good deal of fear about it. Rich from the very beginning understood and I think saw the future of its importance and role in communications in a way that others didn't.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was, others didn't in the newsroom, and it was mostly there was, kind of either, as I said, indifference or resistance. And he pushed back on that.
and the resistance is very strong at the Times because it is a very traditional organization. As I recall, people used to say that getting the Times to change is like getting a battleship or an aircraft carrier to turn around.
Yeah, that's right. It's just, you brought up color, which is in a way an interesting kind of analog. Color was a new technology in a sense. And actually it was a quite common technology at the point at which we introduced color. We were one of the few newspapers at that point that were solely black and white. Everybody else has switched to color, and obviously magazines weren't color, and people used to. Color TV had been around for 30 years. And it was, as you said, it was very much resisted and feared. And I actually had to spend a good deal of energy convincing people, I'm sorry, that color would not, distort our values. And in a way, digital was met with that same sort of, resistance to change.
I believe we have a comment from John Schwartz about the switch to color and one role that Rich played in that. Do we have that we could put on the screen? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Anyway, the gist of John's comment was that there were some software salesmen talking about how you could get this expensive software to make sure that what you saw on the computer screen was what came out in the newspaper, and that Rich looked at it and said, wait a minute, the human eye can do that way better than software can, and saved the Times a lot of money in that process.
Yeah, Rich was real. I mean, another kind of special quality of Rich is that he was super smart, you know, a really good journalist, but he was also very practical and very sort of human based. And also, you know, even before people talked about user experience, which is now a very common term, Rich was very conscious of that, as many designers are. He shared a lot of the qualities of a good designer, in the sense that he was sort of tuned into what normal people, you know, want and perceive, and that also made him an even better journalist. He also brought to the New York Times not just, you know, advances to journalism in the way we communicate, but very significant internal advances in terms of how we actually work with each other internally and use technology. We were, again, a little bit behind in those areas. You know, this is a 150-year-old organization, or even longer, that for most of its history produced, you know, this one print product. And Rich, you know, helped modernize that product and bring our content to digital media. But he also enhanced the tools we used internally, and pushed for those.
We've got this slide showing a picture of Rich in his younger days. In the era when I knew him, he did not have hair on the top of his head like he has a beautiful mane here. But this comment came in from Charles Kaiser. Richard John Meislin, my beautiful friend of 47 years, extraordinary husband of Hendrik Utendahl, youngest Albany bureau chief, magnificent foreign correspondent, father of the New York Times Online, mentor to generations of grateful Times journalists, loyal son and devoted brother, died with dreadful speed Friday morning at Memorial Sloan Kettering at the age of 68 after a short, brutal battle with Merkel cell carcinoma. He enriched the lives of everyone who knew him in 1,000 ways, from saving everyone from computer hell to producing feats from his kitchens in Manhattan and the Catskills. Joe and I cannot imagine our lives without him. Rich and I and Paul Goldberger and David Dunlap and Steve Ratner were our own Times mob in the 70s. When he was president of the Harvard Crimson, he was known as Super Meislin. In the Times newsroom for many decades, he was the one person from whom you could always get both truth and affection. Now Rich gets the greatest privilege any Timesman can aspire to, a beautiful obituary from the incomparable Mr. David W. Dunlap.
Well, that's beautiful, Charles. Thank you.
Yeah. The as innovators and agents of change, there must have been times when you and Rich didn't necessarily see things exactly the same way. What was it like to work through things with him? He struck me as being very professional all the time.
Oh, no, he certainly was. And actually, as you asked that question, I'm kind of trying to think back. Yeah, I'm sure we had some probably minor disagreements, because we actually thought very much alike. And I think, I mean, I learned a lot from Rich, a lot. Technically, he was much further advanced than I was. And, you know, I hope he learned a lot about design from me. But we shared a lot in the terms of aesthetics and the way we just thought about the world. And he was quite professional. You know, basically, you know, he was also, I just want to add, a super nice guy. I mean, you know, you've got a little sense of that from Charles's comment, who is a good friend of his. And I, you know, began with a professional relationship with Rich, but it grew into a very close friendship. And he was, you know, a particularly warm, empathetic person, and that meant, disagreements were not a big problem. He was open-minded, and you're right, he was very professional, and he was smart. He was usually right.
The thing I remember about him is he was super smart. He was way ahead of his time on so many things. And yet he was, as you said, he was super nice, had a great sense of humor. And he was one of the few people in the newsroom who actually had a twinkle in his eye. I mean, he seemed to be able to put things into the proper perspective.
Very much so. He was a really well-balanced human being. And he brought that to his professional life also.
One of the innovations that he did was the cooking section online, which now has the archive of all the recipes. And I came across a tweet that he did, which was years ago. Once this archive had finally gone up, and he was saying in the tweet that it had only taken him 30 years and X number of months to get the cooking archive started, and then he said, just wait till you see what I'm going to get done in 2034. So we've really lost somebody who was a true visionary.
Yeah, and so I want to thank Carl Lavin, who just made a comment. Thank you, Carl.
And part of the thing about the Times is that it is a place where there are a lot of smart people in the place. There are a lot there's a lot of important work going on. People are under a lot of stress. And it did seem that Rich was one of those people who could lighten the stress a little bit, without giving any slack in terms of striving for excellence. But he somehow knew how to lighten the load a little bit.
Yeah, the Times does attract very, very smart people, not surprisingly, and some of them are quite arrogant. And Rich didn't suffer from arrogance. He was smarter than any of them, but he was also modest and was a good listener, and knew what he didn't know, which is also a welcome trait.
He also seemed to mentor a lot of young people. And when I was at the Times, I left in 2009, but when I was at the Times and first came in, the idea of experience and number of years in the place meant a lot to people. And it was hard for younger people to, have a strong voice. But Rich mentored a lot of people. And it occurs to me that Charles Blow was in the graphics department with Rich. And then, of course, Rich mentored a lot of young people at New York Times Digital.
No, very much so. He was just very generous as a person. And as a colleague, very generous. Right.
Well, I really appreciate you on short notice giving us the time here today. And we're going to have a few announcements, and then we have a little video that shows some tweets of what people said about him. But before we go to our final announcements, is there anything you'd like to say just to kind of sum up about Rich?
Sure. I mean, I think he really was an extraordinary person in so many different ways, and I'm very grateful to have known him. And I thank you for allowing me to be a part of this tribute. He was, just really unique. Thank you so much. I
agree 100%. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Carla, for leading us in that tribute to Rich. And I want to make sure that we acknowledge some of the comments that came in. Tom referenced the one from Carl Lavin. Great to see Tom Bodkin talking with Carla about Rich Meislin's endless curiosity and pioneering vision. Tom himself was innovated in print and online, keeping top design in the forefront. We also had a comment from Amy Reinhardt, who is a former guest of the show, talking about the early days of the New York Times and the web. In her words, not a lot of grown-ups took us seriously. Rich was one of those people who believed in the web, was here to stay, and had a real vision for how to develop the New York Times voice online. It's wonderful to have his presence. Bernie and Carla B were North Stars as well. Carla, thank you for arranging to have Amy on the show earlier. Liz Pressman also said that Rich designed the digital archives. As a former New York Times librarian, she is very grateful. And several other. Tara Parker Pope is watching as well. She commented on Twitter earlier, making reference to truth and affection. So thank you so much. Tom, really appreciate you joining us for this tribute. It really means a lot. And Richard's legacy certainly is felt and appreciated. So thank you for taking the time this morning.
Thank you.
So we're going to just move on to a few quick announcements. Tom, if you have a few minutes to hang out with us for a little bit, we'd like you to see that video tribute that we put together.
Sure.
Before we do that, we're just going to mention at 11 o'clock, you'll see She's on Call with Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian. This week's show, Mental Health Recovery, First Steps. You'll see that at 11 a.m. Eastern Time at She's on Call on Facebook and Twitter and on Sri's LinkedIn. And as we mentioned earlier, we have several guests coming up. We won't have a show next Sunday for Independence Day in the U.S., but Marguerite Fox, an author and obituaries writer, will be joining us on the 11th. And then Philip Bump from the Washington Post will be joining us July 18th. And Shashank Bengali, who works with the Times, will be joining us on July 25th. We want to give a quick shout out to our production team again. Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. And wanted to make sure that, again, a shout out to Carla and the work she does with the Local Connection newsletter, which is really great. The Local Connection newsletter is put out by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University each week. They send you story ideas and pro tips for journalists, and best of all, it's free. Subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips. Again, bit.ly/local news tips. So with that, we want to thank you again for joining us. We had Ellen said that was a lovely tribute. Thank you, Ellen. Miriam Berkeley is so glad to hear about Rich Meislin. Patricia Freudenberg says thank you as well. And what we'd like to do is to close with a compilation of, and Diana said, awesome team effort. Another great show. Thank you, Diana. We had a lot of great comments about our segment with Jonathan Boorstein as well. And Jonathan, my apologies. I made it a point to get the correct pronunciation, and I mispronounced it myself. So please forgive me. Chitachi said it was a fascinating conversation. So we'd like to end with that tribute, as I mentioned. We collected some of the tweets that were sent out about Rich, and we want to share that with you as we end today's show. Thank you, Ralph Blumenthal, for watching, another former guest, and Rahadyan saying thank you, everyone, for a great show. So here is that tribute. Thank you.